I want to kind of tell you where we left off. We've been talking about a lot of things that have been leading us up into the ultimately the Civil War. Okay, and the way I've tried to paint the picture for you is like we're building a bridge. We're trying to get from one side to the other. In order to do that, it takes a lot of planks, takes a lot of boards on our bridge. Some boards are bigger than others. Like one of the things we talked about was the financial crash. We talked about the Dred Scott decision, the election of James Buchanan, his inability to do that, the caning of Charles Sumner, bleeding Kansas, John Brown's actions there, Uncle Tom's Cabin, lots of things. So you can't just point at one thing and say this is why the Civil War happened. It's a lot of things, okay? And what we're going to do today is kind of like the last straws, the last things that kind of the straws that break the camel's back. You ever heard that expression? It means it's the ones that that ultimately cause it. Okay, so John Brown. We already know about John Brown because of the actions that he took in Kansas with the massacre of Pottawatomie Creek. What did he do there? What? Yeah, he hacked people into little bitty bits because they were pro or anti-slavery. True. What did he think they were? He thought they were pro-slavery. So he is a very, very strict and staunch abolitionist. And he's so abolitionist that he's radical to the point he's willing to use violence and has shown that he'll use violence in order to accomplish his goal of abolition. And, John Brown is already an infamous character because of his actions in Kansas. But now he appears in an even more terrible way. And his fantastic scheme, and this is his goal here. He wants to invade the South as a citizen. He's not a soldier. He wants to create an armed insurrection and go from plantation to plantation, freeing slaves, arming them, and increasing the size of his army, and march throughout the South, and basically go on a crusade to end slavery. He's going to try to abolish slavery by force with a grassroots movement. But in order to do this, he's got to have weapons. Who has the most weapons in the United States? The United States, the military. And so he goes to a federal arsenal, an armory. You guys remember the armory? Today it's the Raleigh County Convention Center. Have you ever heard anybody call it the armory? Yeah. They used to keep weapons there. There used to be a tank parked out front. Do you guys remember that? There used to be. It's not an armory anymore. It's a convention center now. But it used to be an armory. And there was an armory, a federal arsenal located in the hills of Western Virginia, which is today West Virginia and Harper's Ferry. It's like the Eastern Panhandle today. It's a beautiful place. So he goes there with about 20 men, including several blacks, at Harper's Ferry, where he attempts to seize weapons from a federal arsenal in October of 1859. In doing this, he murders 7 innocent people. One of them is a free black person. Don't really understand that. And injures about 10 more. But the thing is, the slaves were largely, the slaves in the area around Harper's Ferry were largely ignorant of his plan. They didn't know what he was doing and failed to rise up. So, John Brown and the remnants of his tiny band of insurrectionists are quickly halted by the United States Marine Corps under the command of Lieutenant Colonel Robert E. Lee, who was a United States Marine. So, John Brown is captured by force. He was shot in the face in the process, just so you know. Ouch. Doesn't die. But he's captured. So what do you think happens to him? What if we let an armed insurrection and 7 people died and tried to take over? It would not be good. What might be some criminal charges we face? Treason. Not to mention murder and attempted murder and inciting a riot and all kinds of bad stuff. But treason is the absolute worst crime you can commit in the United States, according to the United States. So he's put on trial pretty hastily. Not really, I wouldn't say it's the most fair trial, but I mean, he did it. So, and the trial occurred, and he was found guilty of murder and treason. And basically, he was hanged. He was hanged for his crimes. So that's it. No big deal, right? It's over. They got him. No implications from this, right? There has to be something important about it, otherwise we wouldn't be talking about it. What are the effects do you think that John Brown's actions have on the nation as a whole? I can tell you the effects are calamitous. Do you guys know what that means? Like, it's a calamity. It's tragic. It has terrible consequences. Well, is there any groups in the United States that just can't seem to get along?
Yeah.
Which 2 groups are those? The North and the South. If you are a Northerner, how do you view John Brown and his actions? He is heroic. He is a martyr. He died for a good cause. And what he did was right and just. If you're a Southerner, what is he? He is a murderous traitor. And Brown and his murderous gang of abolitionists got what they deserved. Whereas the abolitionists in the North are infuriated by his execution. I guess they can kind of overlook his past actions in Kansas and even more bloody purposes. But, they remember Ralph Waldo Emerson? Where's he from? He was a transcendentalist from where? We were all transcendentalists from, it seemed like. A state that starts with M. Massachusetts. So he's a very staunch abolitionist. He even writes some poetry and calls John Brown Saint John Brown and compares him to Jesus. All right? Do you think people in the South were comparing him to Jesus? Not even close. So it's just another thing that goes to create more division, more angst, more hatred, and more distrust of each other. The South sees John Brown's actions as proof that there is a Northern conspiracy against them, that the North is intentionally attempting to murder them and kill them. And this is proof, because of slavery. And so you can see how this causes a lot of anxiety and distrust between the 2 sides. And this is 1859. We're less than a year away from shooting at each other formally. Okay? All right, so moving into the election of 1860, which is ultimately the straw that breaks the camel's back. The election of 1860, we all know who wins, in Abraham Lincoln. And you can see that there's a lot of parties that are running. And the fact that there were so many parties, as you can see, the North is very much unified, as they all vote Republican for Abraham Lincoln. But you can see the South is split. Some of them are voting for the Constitution Party, and some are voting for the Breckinridge and the Southern Democratic Party. Okay, the Democratic Party was split altogether. There was a Southern Democrat and a Northern Democrat. The Northern Democrat was the man who actually defeated Abraham Lincoln in the senatorial election in 1858, Stephen A. Douglas. But the Republican Party was unified in their beliefs. Really, the Republicans ran on a platform of not abolition, but no more expansion of slavery, period. So no slavery here. At no point during the 1860 presidential campaign did Abraham Lincoln say, we want abolition, no more slavery ever again. He never said that, okay? It was the platform of the Republican Party to not extend slavery. He also wanted to have a protective tariff for northern manufacturing. How does the South feel about those protective tariff for manufacturing? What in the 1820s? What did they call it? The tariff of abominations. They hated it, and they almost seceded then with John C. Calhoun in the 1830s and 40s. He wanted to have a Pacific Railroad with a northern route. He wanted to have, free homesteads from the public domain, which would be a great assistance to many immigrants coming to the United States, which goes to inflame the nativist factions of the South. So all of these things that President Lincoln or candidate Lincoln ran on in the election of 1860 are heinous and horrible and totally detrimental to Southern beliefs and ideas. At least that's what they thought. So the election of this person and the way in which he was going to put forth his Republican ideas was enough to make many Southern states secede. And the word secede means to leave the Union. And it began a tragic chain reaction of secession. 4 days after the election of the Illinois Baboon, as he was referred to in many newspapers in the South, the Illinois Baboon, many states began to meet and call conventions to vote to secede. South Carolina was the first to do so. They actually said before the election, if Abraham Lincoln is elected, we are seceding. And they held true to their word as they seceded 4 days after the election. And it was a unanimous vote, not a single dissenter. Everyone in the state legislature of South Carolina said we are seceding unanimously. Can you imagine that? Can you imagine anything being unanimous in any part of the American government, whether it be state or local? Or no, it was unanimous. Okay, so that means unanimous means every single person voted for it. All right. So in the following 6 weeks, 6 other states followed suit, although somewhat less united. No other ones were unanimous. But they followed over the secessionist hump and seceded. States like Alabama, Mississippi, Florida, Georgia, Louisiana, and Texas. So initially it was South Carolina, and then 6 other states followed suit very quickly. And as time goes on, 4 more states eventually fell into secession, bringing the total number of states to 11. 11 states seceded. Arkansas, Tennessee, North Carolina, and Virginia. Those are the other 4. Okay? So, with the eyes of destiny upon the original 7 seceders, they formally had a meeting in Montgomery, Alabama. And at that meeting, in February of 1861, they created a brand new government called the Confederate States of America. CSA, the Confederate States of America. They established a confederacy, just like the Articles of Confederation. It wasn't just that the North was attempting to eliminate or to prevent the spread of slavery. These states felt that the Union, that Abraham Lincoln, the federal government, had become too powerful and too oppressive to states. And they wanted the states to go back to having the power. And so that's why they created a confederation. Because it worked out so well in the 1770s and 80s. It was our first form of government that ultimately failed. Remember? Okay. So, as the president of this new country, the Confederate States of America, they chose a Mississippi man who was a member of the United States Senate until they seceded. And his name was Jefferson Davis, a very austere and dignified member. He's a West Pointer and former cabinet member. He has wide military and administrative experience, but he suffered from chronic ill health. He's just kind of a sickly man. So, Abraham Lincoln's not even president yet, and all this is happening. Because, there's a period of time between the election and the actual inauguration. All right, now at that time, the inaugurations did not take place on January 20th or 19th or whenever. It took place in March. So there was 4 months where James Buchanan did nothing. He did nothing. All this is just happening. It's just happening. And he's like, you turn to your leadership to try to help and try to, try to persuade him, try to even come up with a compromise. And James Buchanan's just like, taking the day off. So that's another reason why old Buck is one of our worst presidents. His dereliction of duty. He didn't do it. He just didn't do it. So, there is still some sliver of hope of reconciliation, but as more and more time goes on, it's becoming more and more difficult. And the impending bloodshed kind of spurred up some frantic attempts at compromise. And one of these compromises, which is our American tradition, in the history of Henry Clay, was put forth by Senator James Henry Crittenden of Kentucky. He's trying to follow in the footsteps of his fellow Kentuckian who had recently passed away, Henry Clay. So no more Henry Clay, guys. He's dead now. Sorry. He had a good run, though. About 50 years in politics. So, but anyway, he proposed a set of amendments called the Crittenden Amendments. Crittenden Amendments. And the purpose of these amendments is a last-ditch attempt to appease the South, to try to bring them back. Because it's over. By the time these amendments are made, the Union is gone. There are 2 countries, the United States of America and the Confederate States of America. What these amendments say is that it kind of goes back to the Missouri Compromise. My laser pointer. All right, so you see this line here. That's that Missouri Compromise line. It's that line of latitude, 36 degrees, 30 minutes. It says that slavery in the territories was going to be prohibited north of this line, but south of that line, it could be given federal protection in all territories existing or hereafter. Now, at this time, Cuba was an American territory, and it was thought by many Americans that Cuba was going to be a state one day. It kind of seems silly to us because Cuba, it's a communist country. It was American territory, and many people thought it would be a slave state. And the Crittenden Amendments would allow for Cuba to enter the Union as a slave state, no questions asked, as Cuba most definitely lies south of this line. And any state that enters, north or south of it, could come into the Union with or without slavery as they chose. So, does this pass? No, not at all. Okay, Lincoln flatly rejected these. He said, this is not a good compromise. What's the platform of the Republican Party? Are we going to allow slavery to be expanded? No, it's stop it where it already exists. If Georgia, you have slavery, keep it, but we're not going to expand it anywhere else. So he's not saying to get rid of slavery where it exists. He's saying we're not going to have the expansion of it. And the Crittenden Amendments went totally against his platform. Okay? So, the countries have emerged. The Union is split. There are now two countries. But, aside from, bleeding Kansas and Charles Sumner in Washington, not a lot of blood has been spilled yet. Okay? Not a lot. It really formally begins to, we really say farewell to the Union after the Battle of Fort Sumter, which is the first official battle of the Civil War. Not one casualty, though. Nobody died. It's kind of hard to believe. And this is kind of how it goes. Like the issue, here was like there were several forts that belonged to the United States all throughout America. Many of them were in the South, obviously. One of these forts is called Fort Sumter, which is in Charleston, South Carolina. As you can see, it's a naval fort. It kind of juts out into the ocean. And it was full of soldiers. I mean, it was posted, manned by soldiers who worked for the Union. It was a Union fort. Well, where is this Union fort located? In the heart of the Confederate States of America. And so the South saw this as a threat to their sovereignty. And so basically the South surrounded this fort and began to and blockaded it, not allowing it for any provisions to be sent in. So basically, if you're Abraham Lincoln, and there were really only two of these forts that were significant enough that would be seen as a threat to the South. But Fort Sumter was only harboring about a few hundred men. It's not like they're going to invade or do anything. But President Lincoln was presented with choices about how to handle this, and all the choices were bad. So, if the United States government and the United States soldiers are being threatened by a foreign enemy, what would you do if you were president? Okay, try to settle the conflict, have a little discussion, right? What else could he do? Send more soldiers and kick their butts. You're threatening the United States soldiers? I don't think so. This is the United States of America. Okay, so his choices are all bad because, first of all, there's only a few hundred soldiers in there. Second of all, those few hundred soldiers are running out of supplies, like food. Okay, and they could starve to death because nothing's coming in, nothing's going out, as it's surrounded. So Lincoln kind of has he agonizes over the decision for a while, and then he adopts a middle of the road solution. He notifies South Carolina that an expedition would be sent to provision the garrison, to provide them with provisions, not to reinforce, to provision. And he promised no effort to throw in any more soldiers, arms, or ammunition. He's only sending food. So it kind of puts the ball in the South's court. Now the South has to react. Are they going to allow the provisions to be sent? All right, so let's say they allow the provisions to be sent. How does that look? Makes them look weak. Like, oh, you're just scared. You're scared of the Union. What happens if they say, nope, we're going to attack if you try to reinforce or if you try to provision? How does that make them look? Kind of evil they're just trying to feed some people. Pretty slick by Lincoln. He makes the South look pretty bad here. Like, it puts them in an awkward position. So, what do they choose to do? Attack. They choose to attack. And as a Union naval force started on its way to Fort Sumter, they didn't even get there. Before they even arrived, the South opened fire on the fort on April the 12th, 1861, thereby beginning the Civil War. The cannons the South Carolinians fired on the fort shot for 34 hours. And not a single person died. It is not very good foreshadowing for the future of the war, as it is the most bloody conflict in American history. More American lives are lost during the Civil War than pretty much all the other wars combined. Okay, so now the South is shooting at American soldiers. What are the implications of this? What do you think the newspapers are reading the next day on April 13th? It's a good question. All right. Northern newspapers.
The Confederates opened fire
On poor, helpless, innocent, starving soldiers. How do you feel when you read that if you're a Northerner? Angry? You willing to, because you're angry, what does that make you want to do? Makes me want to go fight. And that's exactly what happened. So it electrified the North. Literally, people began to register and sign up, and they want to go serve their country. And on April the 15th, President Lincoln called up 75,000 militiamen. 75,000. Just imagine 75,000 soldiers in one place. That's pretty powerful. The President of the United States calls up 75,000 militiamen. If you're a Southerner, how do you feel about that? What's the purpose of the President of the United States calling for 75,000 militiamen? They're going to go fight. Who are they going to fight? Me, a Southerner. So they see this as an aggressive act of war, which leads those other 4 states to secede. North Carolina and Tennessee, Virginia, they secede as well. And now it's up to 11. So when the 7 states become 11 and the sides get drawn, the South moves its capital city from Montgomery, Alabama to where? What was the capital of the South? Richmond, Virginia. It's like an hour drive to Washington from Richmond. Very close. Okay? All right. So, the sides are drawn. We got the capitals, Richmond being here, DC is like right here. But there's a couple of issues in these yellow states here. These states we refer to as border states. And in 1861, obviously there was no West Virginia. West Virginia didn't become a state until 1863. But it's considered a border state because it's a state that was born out of the Civil War. All right? But these are border states. What makes these states border states? Are they on the side of the Union or on the side of the South? Well, it's kind of a mix. Does Missouri have slaves? Does Missouri have slavery legally? Remember the Missouri Compromise? Does Missouri have slavery? Yes. Does Kentucky have slavery? Does Virginia have slavery? Does Maryland have slavery? Does Delaware have slavery? All of these are slave states, but all of these states stay in the Union except for Virginia. Okay, Virginia is the southern, it's the capital of the South. Okay, but West Virginia becomes a border state because it secedes from Virginia during the war. But these are the border states. Okay, these states are important because there's a lot of railways here. The border states actually contained a white population, more than half of the entire Confederacy. Lots of people living in Maryland and Delaware and Kentucky, and a little bit in mountain white people in West Virginia, who didn't really have slavery as a necessity, as there's no large-scale agriculture in the mountains where slavery is necessary. You can't grow cotton in West Virginia. Okay, so in dealing with these border states, President Lincoln has to be pretty sly. He wants these states to remain loyal to the Union. Can he mess with slavery in 1861 when the Civil War begins? No, and he makes no mention of ending slavery. So why are we fighting a war in 1861? What's the purpose of the Civil War, according to Abraham Lincoln, in 1861? To keep the Union, to bring everybody back in, to preserve the Union. That was the purpose of the Civil War in 1861. What is the purpose of the Civil War in 1865? To end slavery. So the war aims change as time goes on. If he would have said the purpose of the war is to end slavery in 1861, guess what all these states would have done? They would have joined the Confederacy because they wanted to keep their slavery. All right. However, Abraham Lincoln doesn't do that. He says we want to preserve the Union, and that's how he's able to maintain these border states. Okay. So, and he publicly declared that the fighting was not to free black people. No anti-slavery declaration was made. An anti-slavery war would have been very unpopular with a lot of different people, both North and South. So, questions? Questions on this so far? All right, next time we're going to look at the strengths and weaknesses of both sides. Strengths and weaknesses. So if you have questions, don't hesitate to give me a shout, and I'll be happy to answer them. And hope you guys enjoy your weekend.